Hi, everyone. Welcome. It looks like we are having a number of participants join in. So I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds while you all start to filter in, and we'll get started with our presentation in about 1 minute. All right, it looks like we have welcomed everyone into our virtual room today. So I'd like to go ahead and get started. My name is Colleen Kelly. I am the staff director at the Social Innovation and Change Initiative. And today, hopefully you are here because you are interested in learning more about SAIC's New World Social Innovation Fellowship Program. So when you hear the word social change maker, I'm curious to know, what do you think? If you can drop in your response in the chat, it's nice to see everyone introducing themselves. We have folks calling in from Tel Aviv, from Brazil, New York. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so when you think of a social change maker, what do you think about? An innovator? Lots of introductions. Risk, challenging the status quo. Great. These are all really wonderful responses. So when we achieving socially positive impact, revolutionary, innovative solutions to old problems, a leader, wow, you guys should be in this seat today, I think. Well, I think SAIC is very aligned with what you all are talking about. When we hear the word social change makers, we think social change makers are people who challenge all of us to see the hierarchies and inequities that many have come to accept as the way that things are. They work to shift power in deeply rooted systems, whether that's finance, education, energy, healthcare, just a few examples, for a more equitable, just, and healthy society and planet. Social change makers can be individuals, communities, organizations, movements, governments, and even companies. They work across sectors in small and profound ways, planting the seeds for society's new norms. Our mission is to grow the world's capacity for social progress and accelerate it. We work with first-time and long-time social change makers. We nurture the ecosystems they need to thrive, and we bring them together to learn and support each other. We do this through teaching and researching the theory and practice of social change. Social change makers see the world as it is now and imagine what it could be. What's in between? That's the work. So today you will learn about the Cheng Fellowship, but if you're inspired by some of the other work that we're doing at the Social Innovation and Change Initiative, I invite you to sign up for our newsletter or reach out to us at sici@hks, as in Harvard Kennedy School, .harvard.edu. You can follow the information in the chat. But for now, I'd love to turn it over to my colleague, Ali Phillip, who is our program manager of the Cheng Fellowship, to tell you more about probably why you came here today. Thanks so much. Take it away, Ali.
Thanks, Colleen, and welcome everyone. I'm Ali Phillip. I'm the program manager of the Cheng Fellowship, and I'm really excited to share more with you about the program today. Also, just a little language llama. It's something that we do when there's a clarification that's needed or you don't know the term that's being used. We use Cheng Fellowship and the New World Social Innovation Fellowship interchangeably. They are the same program. They are not two different fellowship programs. So the fellowship really bridges all the aspects of SAIC's work that Colleen just shared about. So we work with those social change makers, those first-time and long-time innovators who are working maybe on a brand new idea, or maybe trying something out for the first time, or who have been working on their effort or their work for multiple decades. And we create a supportive ecosystem of 15 fellows across 5 different Harvard schools, which you'll hear from shortly, who are working on many different social problems and a multitude of different pathways, from a nonprofit to a social enterprise to government or corporations and companies. And we teach research frameworks that really focus around the theory and practice of social change. And we work with the fellows in this program to apply those frameworks to the work that they're advancing. So hopefully you came and like none of this is too crazy or too different information than what you were expecting, but I know you all have a few questions that you want answered. So I'm going to go through our 6 FAQs about the fellowship program, and it's really sourced from the registration that you all provided. So thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and comments. The first is eligibility, getting that out of the way at the start. So you all can know, okay, if you're not eligible, we're not going to take up this hour of your time. What you can expect from the program, what are the key program components, how COVID-19 might impact programming for next year, the process to apply, and then whenever I share the process, right after, people are always like, but really, what are you looking for in an applicant? So we'll tell you a little bit more about that too, and then we'll share some examples of past Cheng Fellows work. If you have questions throughout, feel free to chat them in either to the chat, to all panelists and attendees, or just the panelists, or using the Q&A function. We'll chat between the two of them, but primarily I think we'll be chatting through the chat function. So encourage you to prioritize putting things there first. Okay, question 1, are you eligible? Like I said, getting this out of the way at the top, there's also a ton of information on our website. So for those of you who already know the answer to this question, I don't want to waste your time, but I just want to make sure that people know you need to be a currently enrolled Harvard student at either the Kennedy School, the Business School, Ed School, School of Public Health, or Harvard College. And we accept students primarily in their final year of their program. So that means 90% of the eligible students are graduating in spring of 2022. There are a few exceptions. So at Harvard College, you could be a junior and a senior and apply. ED/LD students are only eligible if they're applying, or if they're graduating in spring 2023. And DRPH students can apply in their 2nd or 3rd year. If you're not one of those 3 exceptions, you should be graduating in spring of 2022. And I still get questions after sharing this, so I'll kind of group together the most frequently asked ones. Are you eligible if you're a joint degree student? Yes, you just apply in your final year. Part-time students are eligible. International students are eligible. Remote students, people who are working, maybe it's because you're joint, maybe it's because you're international, maybe it's because your school is offering a hybrid offer. All of those students are eligible to apply as well. And if you are a pair, we do not take groups into our fellowship, but we do take co-founders or people who are in leadership roles of their organization. You do need to apply individually, and each applicant needs to meet the eligibility criteria outlined, meaning that you need to be one of the participating Harvard schools, you need to be in that appropriate graduating year for the school that you're applying from. And in the past, we've accepted pairs, and we've also accepted one member of a pair. So we really do look at them individually, encourage you to put your best application forward, although you're welcome to share information between the 2 of your applications. They should obviously be aligned and be driving towards the same thing. You'll see that we are not accepting students from Harvard schools that are beyond the ones that are listed. And we also cannot accept alumni. And these are criteria that outlined at the beginning of the fellowship and are just kind of what is established for now. We really hope in the future we will be able to expand to other Harvard schools, but right now it is just the 5 that I've currently listed. I'll just check to see if any chat questions are coming through. Lots of intros, love to see it. Okay. So now, you're eligible, hopefully you're still here and you're curious to learn more. I'll share a little bit about what you can expect from the fellowship programming. So at its core, you can expect that you'll have weekly co-curricular sessions through the fellowship where we introduce different frameworks that will help you really think through your social impact strategy. So this includes frameworks like theory of change, where you articulate the actions and activities you undertake to lead to social impact, or stakeholder mapping with really an emphasis on power. So not only who's in the system that you're working on, but how they might impact or influence the work that you're doing. We also do tactical workshops like sharing your written work with funders or receiving feedback and then refining your pitch to share with a broader audience. So we do a mix of both like practice-oriented work and academic-oriented work. And if you have more questions on exactly what frameworks we teach in the fellowship, you can feel free to contact us at the SIC email. It does change a little bit on a year-to-year basis based off of the needs of our community. And folks also frequently ask us, how much time should I expect to be involved in the fellowship programming? We meet every week and attendance is required in our sessions for 2 to 3 hours a week. And that is typically includes some time for pre-work too. So it might be like a 2-hour session with an hour for pre-work or a 2.5-hour session with 30 minutes for pre-work. We're still deciding what that will look like for next year, but that is a baseline what you can expect for a time commitment from the program. We also offer a lot of individualized and custom support for the fellows through regular check-ins and open office hours. And in addition to our team, the SIC team, which is myself, Colleen, our executive director, some of the folks here on this call too who are supporting this particular session, we also have a community of visiting social innovators who are accomplished practitioners who come to our virtual campus or in-person campus to offer individualized coaching and advising really on strategic priorities or questions that the Cheng Fellow community has. They also offer general events for the broader Harvard audience. So if you're interested in connecting with this community and you are not a Cheng Fellow, you'll be welcome to do so this academic year. And while we provide a lot of support in the fellowship, I always like to include this as an element of the fellowship programming because it's really an action-oriented program. We are selecting students who are motivated to make progress on an effort, to proactively seek solutions, and identify connections that advance their work. And this fellowship is a support structure and provides you with a community of people who will help you drive change and really hopefully accomplish your goals for this year. But it is not the only thing that you should be doing during your time on campus if you hope to launch and lead an effort when you graduate. So many students in our program spend between 15 to 20 hours a week outside of those 2 to 3 hours in the fellowship sessions actually advancing their work. The fellowship, as I said, one more time, just to make sure it's really clear, should not be the only thing that you're doing to drive your effort forward while in school. And if you are spending that time driving your effort forward and really are committed to driving progress on the social problem you're working on and through the pathway of your choice, you should have no problem accessing that $30,000 of postgraduate funding. So all students complete something called a social change plan, which is the capstone project for the fellowship, where you articulate what you did in the fellowship, what you learned, and what you hope to do upon your graduation. And you defend in front of a committee of the SIC team and faculty members for that $30,000. We'll go to the remote session duty in just one moment. That's a really good question. I also included community as an element of our program because time and time again, students obviously love faculty members we put them in front of and get to connect with practitioners in the space. And they find the frameworks and theory that we teach to be particularly useful in driving social impact strategy. But that's honestly not their favorite element of their program. I think the thing that again and again we hear is the most valuable aspect of this program is the people who are in our community. And the reality is being a social innovator or a social change maker while you're in school can actually be kind of isolating or particularly challenging, because to make meaningful progress on the effort of your choice and to really address a sticky social problem, you have to make some sometimes difficult choices. It might mean forgoing a popular course because of the time commitment, or saying no to social activities over spring break because you actually need to be in the field and work on your project. And experiencing these things with another group of students who are also going through the exact same thing as you and who are making the exact same type of hard choices that you're making is probably the best and most supportive part of this experience. It's also pretty rare that you'll be in a room with students across 5 Harvard schools, and not just a big lecture hall, but a small group of 15 students who actually get to talk to each other, learn from each other, and connect from each other. And we do a lot to really facilitate this community because we believe that the community enables the success of all of the other elements of our program. Okay. We're not having people unmute themselves in the session. I see there's a hand raised. So if you could just chat in your question into the Q&A, that would be great, and we can answer it there. And I'm just taking a pause for any Q&A. Okay. So to clarify, I think it's helpful to share the other groups of questions that we get that is not represented in what we do actually do. We do not provide course credit. Unfortunately, this is for students who are really already planning or already committed to advancing something and leveraging their time at Harvard to hopefully do that, and providing a scaffolded way for them to really effectively drive change and just drive impact. So it is not for a course, even though it is a substantial time commitment. We also don't provide financial aid or tuition reimbursement, so that $30,000 cannot go towards tuition or financial aid. It is really for driving postgraduate action on the effort of your design. And there are a number of fellowship programs that exist across Harvard or other ways of getting financial aid and support. That is just not our particular program. And finally, we do not prioritize technical support sessions. We do encourage those questions, and we have a number of different ways that we support students on their technical aspects of their effort through one-on-one office hours. But because of the diversity of social problems people in our community are working on and the diversity of stages, it's very hard to have a technical support session that is effectively working for all of our students. So we really double down on the social impact strategy, which works really well for people across the diversity of spectrums, working in different geographies, on different problems, and at different stages. And we encourage students to connect with the technical support resources on campus, particularly the Harvard Innovation Lab. To answer some of your maybe more product development questions or specific questions on raising investments or your marketing strategy. And our team is also happy to do that one-on-one. But many of our students find the iLab and the Venture Incubation Program to be a wonderful counterpart to the fellowship. So our students are often fellows with us, but also involved in other programs across Harvard, and we encourage them to do so. So it is not at all a conflict of interest. Okay. I see a few questions on eligibility, so I want to just circle back to that really quickly to make sure that those are answered, because they're a little bit quicker of questions. So one question is, second-year HKS students are eligible. Are first-year grad students eligible? The answer is mostly no, unless you are one of those exceptions that I talked about, an EDLD student, a DRPH student, or a Harvard College student. So first-year grad students need to wait until their second year to apply. Another question was, are doctoral candidates eligible to apply? Yes, they are. If academic year 21-22 is your final year, yes. So yes, you should apply that year. It is your last chance to apply. So if next year is your final year, you are in a good position to apply. The majority of our candidates are graduating in spring 2022. Okay. So moving to this question about what will next year look like, we'll follow the Harvard Kennedy School guidelines for on-campus return, and also just for us to take all the necessary health precautions needed to keep our community safe and healthy. And we follow the HKS guidelines because we are based at the Harvard Kennedy School. We expect that most of our programming will take place in person, so on-campus sessions. And for those students who are remote or who are maybe not comfortable being on campus for whatever reason, we'll work with accepted students on a case-by-case basis. But you are not ineligible to apply if you are remote. You're welcome to do so. Okay. I see EDM is a one-year program. Are you eligible? Great, and Colleen, thank you very much. So our team is going to manage some of the chat questions too. Okay, so now you know what to expect. You know what not to expect. You have a sense of if you're even eligible to apply. And there's a number of you here who are saying, yes, I'm ready to apply. What do I do next? So first is make sure you don't miss that application deadline, which is July 11th at midnight or 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. Mark that in your calendar. Make sure you're aware we do not create any extensions. It is the same deadline for everyone. The application has been open for a month already and will be open for one more month. So you have plenty of time still. And then after a few weeks, we will notify finalists. Finalists will be asked to have a Zoom interview. So it's important to note that when you get notified, you have only a few days to schedule your interview. Interviews are on a first come, first served basis, which is why I like to make this really transparent from the beginning. So you're not getting an email on July 30th and are all confused about why it's a really fast turnaround. I want you to know that right in advance, it's a quick turnaround. That's because we have 3 full days of interviews that take place over Zoom from August 9th to 11th. After interviews, we make our decisions for all the finalists known by the 13th. And applicants who have not been accepted are known throughout the process. So if you're not decided, if you were not selected as a finalist, we will let you know in advance. I also know that a number of you are working on the application already. So I want to highlight that we have our evaluation rubric for the Cheng application is publicly available on our website. A core value of our team throughout the selection process is really making this process as transparent as possible, which involves letting you all know how exactly we're assessing each of your applications. So I encourage you to carefully read the rubric. You can actually go to the Cheng website right now under selection criteria and click the rubric, and it will be chatted out to you in just a moment. And I also encourage you to read the application carefully, to be aware of the word limits, which is on purpose to make sure that you are really being concise and communicating the most important things about your effort and the work that you're doing, and to carefully read the help text because we are prompting for exactly what is in the rubric. Our goal is to actually support you in putting your best application forward. We're not trying to trip you up, and we are not trying to hide any criteria for you. We want the students who are a good fit for the program to have the best chance of success going forward. I'm going to skim any Q&A. This is usually where people are livening up. Okay, some good questions in the chat, but I will come back to them during our question and answer time. Okay, like I said, people never take me seriously when I say our rubric is posted publicly and that we are making decisions based off of that rubric. So I'll give you the Spark Notes version of that rubric, or a shorthand version of what that rubric is really saying. But ultimately, there are no hidden criteria, and it is exactly what is written. But first and foremost, we look for students and applicants who bring a deep understanding of a significant social problem that they're committed to addressing. So fellows should enter the program with a strong understanding of the problem that they're working on and a vision for how the world could be transformed if that problem was addressed. So we actually spend, I would say, the least amount of time on problem definition and formulation in the fellowship, although we expect that students' understanding and the depth of their understanding of that problem will increase over the time. We really expect you to come in with a strong fluency in the problem space you're working in to begin with. In addition, we ask candidates to demonstrate their personal ability to lead change on the social problem they identified. So not just like you're a generally really good leader, but you actually are personally well positioned to lead progress on the social problem that you're talking about. So we look for applicants who have a long-standing relationship to the social problem and to the community that they intend to serve, as well as relevant mindsets, experiences, skills that will enable them to be an effective social change leader. People also often ask, what does it mean to have a long-standing relationship with the community that I intend to serve? It means the people that you are hoping to make their lives better or to really support through your effort. You either have lived with them for a long time, you identify as part of that community, you have a long-standing professional relationship with them. There's a number of ways you can demonstrate long-standing personal commitment and personal relationship. And last, this should be obvious, applicants should have a promising pathway for demonstrating social change. And you don't need to have it all figured out by any means, but we look for applicants who have a clear hypothesis to address the specific and very well scoped social problem that they're working on, as well as logic and evidence to demonstrate that there is really potential for impact through this pathway. It doesn't need to be this like huge project that's transforming the entire world. It could be a project that's going to transform the market they're working within or the community that they're working for. And that is really meaningful to us. But there should be evidence or early indicators that the way that you're going about your work will be effective in addressing that social problem. fellows should really be able to articulate, what their idea is and how it's innovative from within their existing implementing context. So that means like different from or complementary to other efforts within the ecosystem they're working in. So it doesn't need to be the whole world. You might be bringing an idea that's existed in the US to Nepal. That is perfectly appropriate. But you should be able to say, like, why is this idea relevant or different within the Nepalese context? And also, I think people look at these criteria and look at the rubric and are concerned that they will definitely not have all threes or all highest scores in the categories. And we do not expect that for you to become a fellow. In fact, no applicant has ever received like 100% or a 33, which is the highest score you can get on our rubric. We expect growth and development throughout the year. And if you got all 33, you got a 33 and you were the first person ever to do that, we would have a real conversation with you in your interview about how we might add value to you and what you really hope to get from the program. So we encourage and make a lot of space for growth and development in this program. I also just wanted to introduce like where we're coming from creating these criteria from. Our organizing framework is known as the 3P framework, which focuses on the problem, the person, the pathway, as you can see in our criteria in our rubric in the summary right here. And the intersection of the three and your clear articulation of the three is really what your fit will be as a social innovator. Just to give you a quick version of what this means, we are not as good at supporting or less inclined to support research projects, people who are just exploring really an idea or a problem and want to do some research on that. There's plenty of programs at Harvard that do support research projects. This is not one of them. Also folks who want to work on broader social issues. We find that those folks we are also less inclined to support because we are less effectively positioned to support them. We are not as well inclined to support or as well positioned to support people who are looking for general leadership development or students who do not have a clear understanding of the community that they intend to serve. One, because we find students who lack clear understanding of the community they intend to serve are less effective at driving change. You can be very frustrated by the process and also could potentially create unintentional harm to that community. And also leadership development, there's a number of wonderful programs across Harvard for general leadership development as well. We're looking for folks who are really inclined to develop leadership and advance their efforts as it relates to the problem that they're working on. And last, we're not inclined to support students and fellows who don't have a clear plan on how they might advance their effort while also pursuing an academic degree and don't seem to demonstrate a realistic understanding of the time and energy that might take. So if you're involved in like 10 million extracurricular activities, you have a full-time job, you also are doing this effort, you also have like a full plus course load, we will ask some real questions about what it might mean for you to be ready and motivated to drive this work forward. And you should have a realistic understanding of what that will look like for you. Okay, I'll take a skim of the chat before we go through.
I think there are quite a few
issues. Oh,
go ahead, Allie.
Okay, I'll go this and then you can go, Colleen, too. So a broad social issue, Doreen, it's a really good question. It might mean you're working generally on climate change or generally on poverty alleviation or generally on energy. And you don't really have a scope of what part of that system are you working on. If you're working on the entire system, you should be able to articulate why you are well positioned to work on the entire system. So an example of that might be climate change. It is a systems level problem. It might require ecosystem and orchestration across a number of different countries with a number of different stakeholders. If you are doing something at that level, you should be able to say, what part of the climate change ecosystem are you working within and why are you well positioned to do that? I think if you're working generally on poverty alleviation, it can be very hard to measure progress, to find what is your niche, how are you going to measure that and take responsibility for addressing that part of the problem. So instead, we've had students who work very specifically down on poverty alleviation and addressing outcomes for young girls who are living in West Africa, or the young adult community here in Boston who's experiencing homelessness, how you might alleviate poverty and create advancement for their lives. That is specific. They're well positioned to work on those areas and they can measure how they're driving progress. So I hope that answers your question of the distinction between kind of well scoping a problem versus a general social issue that is very hard to take accountability for or to really measure what progress you're driving on it. Colleen, I know you were going to chime in too.
Yes, I was just going to say, I see a lot of questions that are kind of around the stage of the work that you're at or looking for alumni examples. So I think we're going to answer those questions now.
Wonderful. I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Allie. So you're probably wondering, this is all really great. I'm super excited. I want to apply, but can you tell me, what does this actually look like in practice? So to give you a more concrete sense of who has been a part of this community, I wanted to share a few alumni profiles of where they started, what they did, and sometimes where they are now. So first, I'll start with Zenith Ibrahim. Zenith joined us. She was transitioning out of the private healthcare sector and came to the Social Innovation and Change Initiative and this fellowship program with the idea to start a community healthcare model in her hometown of Cape Town, South Africa. Because she deeply knew the community, she was able to take focused action and launch her organization, JAMI, by the end of the year at the fellowship. And after 2 years since she's graduated, she is now running home-based care options in South Africa. We also have Shawan Jackson. You might be more like Shawan. So Shawan was someone who has worked on his effort for 1 to 2 years prior to entering the fellowship program. And you might know that you're onto something that's addressing a really critical issue. Shawan came into the program with a few years of running a social justice public speaking program. And is leaving the fellowship having raised nearly $300,000 and is stepping into this role full-time as founder and executive director of Vocal Justice. There was also a question earlier about if we support entrepreneurs, people working within existing companies, government, or other organizations. The answer is yes, we absolutely do. And I'm excited to tell you about Manivan and Panaya. There are people who have dedicated their lives to driving change within existing institutions like companies, or in the case of Mani, the Indian government. So Mani came to the fellowship with a plan to build on his decades of work and actively transform waste management in Bangalore, India, in partnership with a community action group. He came to the fellowship to launch CTAG, and is creating a healthier, safer, and cleaner city in Bangalore, and illustrating a model that the government can use to scale nationally. And last, but certainly not least, we have Trisha Prabhu, who have been running their organizations for multiple years and received significant recognition and support for their work, in addition to producing a lot of impact. Trisha came into the fellowship program as founder of Rethink, a technology to stop cyberbullying. And while the product was pretty much baked, Trisha really joined our program to think through the next evolution of her innovative strategy. So what is the next 5 years of Rethink's work going to look? And how can she get the technology to everyone who needs it and shape an internet culture to be a kinder place? So for many of you, you likely know, we at SICE believe innovation does not end after launching an organization, an effort, or a movement. It is woven throughout the entirety of the process. And we've worked with fellows and leaders who are all along that spectrum. So while the stage of their work and their pathways are very different, all of these fellows share a deep understanding of the social problem that they're working on and a steadfast commitment to driving progress on that problem. And they use their time in the fellowship to accelerate their pathway forward to driving change. So I hope that that answers several of the questions that people had about kind of what stage you might need to be at, or what can be supported. I believe there was a question also that several of the examples are international. So we do want to communicate, absolutely. We get a lot of questions about, do we support international projects and international students? Yes, obviously, Zenith came from South Africa, Mani came from India. We have had a number of fellows representing more than 50 countries around the world, working in their home countries or doing work in other countries outside of the United States. We also do support folks who are working in the United States, which I think was also a question that came in through the chat. So let me just take a quick skim and see if anything else is coming up. any issue if the solution has received some funding or grants? Absolutely not. You know, as I pointed to the example with Trisha, she had raised thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for her effort. I think the distinction between you know, her example, she is an entrepreneur, or if you are an applicant who has raised a significant amount of funding and has a proven model, you know, what I think we'll be looking for is that innovation question. What is it that you want to explore? What's the next boundary? Certainly we need innovative ideas and impactful efforts to scale as well. All right, so before we open it up more broadly to Q&A, I just want to encourage you to please sign up for our newsletter if you're interested in the Cheng Fellowship Program, or more generally about what you've heard from us at the Social Innovation and Change Initiative. So you can click to sign up. We will also share the link as we did earlier in the chat. You can go to our website and apply to become a Cheng Fellow. And of course, you can email my wonderful colleague, Allie, with any questions that you have about the fellowship. Importantly, for equity, we do not respond. We're not able to give feedback or respond and engage on conversations that are specific to your application or your effort during this process, because we unfortunately do not have the capacity to provide that level of customized coaching to every applicant. But if you do have questions about the process or anything else about our kind of work at SISE that would help you to complete the application that is not specific to you, then we would be happy to answer those questions. So I think that we still have a couple of questions. One being that, are we going to send this recording out? Yes, we will. So if you were able to join us, but maybe a little bit late, or if you're like, hey, I need to go back and listen to the response that Allie gave earlier, you can absolutely go back and listen to this again.
I also pulled some questions from the chat, so I will pull some of those out right now. So one is, if you are in a pair, does the 30K double as, can you get up to 60K, or is it a 30K ceiling? If you are in a pair and you and your co-founder are accepted, it is up to 30K for both of you. Or you can think of that as like 15K each. The 30K is the ceiling. We are not trying to fund two organizations or the same organization double. So that is why we have that also for equity in how we administer funding at Harvard. Colleen, I will softball this question over to you because I think it's a great one. In what ways have you seen the fellowship typically change or enhance in the fellow's initial project idea? So how have you seen that kind of transformation over the arc of your 5 years at SISE?
Thank you. Wow, I feel like I'm on a morning talk show. So I think that there are a lot of different transformations. I mean, I think that the very tactical ones to point to are certainly kind of ones that are really important from an organizational perspective, but less personally fulfilling for me. So a couple of things that we think of when we think of some are kind of the organizational project metrics. So an increase in funding that fellows are able to mobilize in support of their work, an increase in the hours invested in their effort. So whether that's themselves or mobilizing and bringing in other stakeholders to contribute time towards their effort. And then the third is really recognition. Are they, getting press coverage, awards, or otherwise kind of mobilizing attention to the specific social problem? So those are three dimensions that we really think about in terms of organizational success. I think what's probably most interesting and distinct about our program relative to other kind of accelerator programs, anyone can kind of track those measures of organizational success. We are embedded inside of an educational institution. And so I think one of the biggest transformations is the learning and mindset shift that happened for the fellows who go through our program. And I see that really happening in two ways. One is that we do not let our fellows off the hook on deeply exploring and understanding the problem. As Allie said, we look for applicants who already have a very strong comprehension and proximity to the social problems that they're trying to solve in this world. But problems like this are complex and nuanced and dynamic. So we really tie everything that we work with our fellows on throughout the year back to, is this actually moving the needle and trying to create progress against that social problem and closer to a vision of the world that you want to live in, that we all want to live in. The second is really about the community. So I think anyone that you talk to who has been part of this program, myself included, as a facilitator of the program, is that this is a very special community. Doing social change and social innovation work is extremely tireless, taxing, but it's vital work. And having a community of people who are not in competition with you, but actually supporting, championing, and excited for the impact that you're driving in the world, I think makes a world of difference. And we've seen over the years that alumni are still deeply connected. They're sending each other opportunities. They're organizing their own calls. They're still reaching out to us to keep us updated. So I would say, the organizational progress that we've seen, the learning that happens, particularly the connection between the efforts that students are moving forward as it relates to the problems they're trying to solve, and then the community. That was a bit of a long-winded answer, but I've been here for a long time, so I have a lot of opinions on that.
I thought you'd be perfect to answer that. I also see a few quick questions, and then we'll go back to some of the more in-depth ones. One is, if you're remote, just to reaffirm that if you're remote, you are able to participate in the program. We will make accommodations for remote accepted students, and we will work on a case-by-case basis about what that will look like. It will be a different experience. We expect that most students will be on campus, so remote students will have a different type of experience, and we will work with them to think about what that will look like. I also see a really good question about answering some, or about citing data, and how you might provide citations, a formal citation, or do you just mention the source in the text, really what you're most comfortable with. I think sometimes the formal citations can be short and easy to embed, or you can kind of reference sources of data in the text. You might also reference your lived experience or things that you've seen throughout your life as a way of having kind of informal data points. And those also count as citations to us. They also count as indicators that you understand the problem deeply, or indicators that you're observing something in a system that is becoming a pattern, or at least is something you've observed in your own life that you're trying to dig into more deeply. Okay. Here's another question. Colleen, I'll ask you this one about the type of support that students typically receive after they graduate.
Sure. I also want to put that together with a question that just came in about programming. So maybe you and I can both take that one, Allie.
Sounds good.
So in terms of the alumni, we have a burgeoning alumni community of almost 100 fellows who have graduated from the program at this point. They're wonderful. Many of them are still actively advancing this work either through the specific project that they advanced during their fellowship year, or working and having evolved that idea into a more effective quote unquote solution. So there are a couple of ways that we stay engaged. One, we are still deeply invested in the fellows' work. So personally, we love to just kind of continue to provide feedback, coaching, office hours to our alumni. We also think a lot and prepare during the spring semester rigorous conversations about what post-grad is going to look like. So, as I said, we create this kind of nurturing environment and holding container for fellows to learn and make progress during the year. And we use some of our time in the spring to really think about, okay, you've made it this far with your program. What are the goals that you are wanting to set for yourself and the milestones that you want to hit after you graduate? And what support structures do you need for yourself as an individual, yourself as an organizational or movement leader, and for your organization to thrive? So really thinking about that, not at the point of graduation when you're kind of gone, but helping to create a scaffolded experience that leads you to set up support structures that will enable you and your efforts to thrive after you graduate. So I hope that answers your question. There was another question about what the programming specifically includes, how the 2 to 3 hours per week are spent. So maybe I'll throw that one to you, Allie.
That sounds good. That's a great question. So I'll kind of walk you through how we might structure one of our typical weekly sessions. So I think you can basically think that it will be a minimum of 2 hours. So we'll start with 2 hours. So you'll come into the session and you'll come in most likely having a little bit of pre-work in advance that will introduce you to the framework or the theory that will be talked about in today's session. So I'll use theory of change, for example. You might have watched a video on what theory of change is. You'd have a little bit of pre-work about writing your own organization's theory of change. And then you'd come to the session and we would talk about that framework in even a level of depth further than you explored in the pre-work. And we call that kind of like the I do time. So we demonstrate to you what the framework is. We increase your understanding of that framework. And then we have some we do time where we have an example from the community, from one of our students in the room, from one of our fellows, applying that framework and that level of depth deeper into an example of how you might demonstrate theory of change. So that might look like filling out a logic model, which is a typical template for a theory of change, and then walking through kind of how they understand and articulate their logic model. And then we have a you do, where you'll go and you'll take the insights that you learned from both the pre-work, the in-session lecture, and the fellow case, and apply that to your own work in small groups and pairs. So it is highly interactive in terms of the structure. We try not to lecture for more than 20 minutes at a time. So there's a lot of like group work and application of the work into your own efforts, which is why we need that time. So I hope that answers your question and walks you through kind of our I do, we do, you do structure. Okay. The 2 to 3 hour sessions, oh, here's one more question on it, or a few more questions that are being coupled on the session. So we decide with the group of accepted students when the session will happen. So in years past, it's been on Tuesday evenings. This year, because we had an international community and people who had different time zones that would work, we did it on Tuesday morning, and we'll work with this community to see what day works for them and what time works for them. But I anticipate will likely be at some point on a Tuesday.
There was also a question that I think came in, maybe Alondra answered it already so quickly. There was a question that came in about if you are remote, are you eligible to apply? Yes, this year, we know that there are students who may be remote. I think Ali maybe mentioned this in the eligibility. So you are welcome to apply, and we will take that into account when we are setting the time as well. So hopefully everyone can participate. And then another question on timeline after acceptance, which I think is related to this. So Ali, do you want to share up to the point of acceptance and then how we communicate with fellows after they've been accepted into the program?
Yeah, so I'll share about after acceptance, just because the timeline up until acceptance was covered in the session. So please go back and watch the video. And there's a few questions I see coming in that have actually been answered. So I'll encourage folks to go back and look through the PowerPoint. But after you're accepted, typically you'll have a few weeks until the semester starts. So we do our first session starting on shopping week, typically on that Tuesday of shopping week. And then I'm not exactly sure what day that is this year, but when the semester starts, the fellowship starts. And then we'll see you weekly for the entirety of the academic year, most likely every Tuesday at the same time. And that will take place with the exception of holidays, breaks, J-term, things like that. We will be offline. And often students use that time to be in the field and to advance their work really rapidly, the time you don't get when you have freedom for classes, and then also do office hours and such with us. So that's what it looks like after you are accepted. And then once you graduate, around the same time of graduation, a little bit before, you'll defend your work. Typically this takes place from May to June. You'll do that social change plan that I talked about in that capstone project and defend for that $30,000 if you are so inclined to do. Every year we have a few students who consider maybe this isn't what I want to do post-graduation, but I've learned a lot from this program and I've learned a lot from doing this work. And I actually think that I'm going to take a different pathway and maybe I will not apply for that 30K. And we also make space for students to decide that this is not what they want to do. And that is also success for us because people are learning, they're contributing to the field of work. They're advancing kind of these hypotheses that other people may have not advanced, and then letting folks know what may or may not be effective in addressing the problem they care about. So that's kind of what it looks like in an arc. A lot of time together is what it looks like after acceptance. This is a hard question, Colleen, but I'm gonna ask you. And maybe we'll have different answers. So I think it's an interesting one. But a student asked us, what is the hardest part of the fellowship? What has been the hardest part of the fellowship? So I'm curious to hear your take, and then I can also chime in.
Hardest part of the fellowship. That's such a good question. You know, I think that the hardest part of the fellowship is, I don't know, Allie, I'm really curious to hear your response too. I think we might actually have similar takes on this. I think the hardest part of the question is the kind of hardest part that anyone has in their own leadership journey is personal growth and development. The technical stuff is actually the easiest part. Like, it's really easy. Like, it's not that it's easy to produce a theory of change or a logic model or to answer, create a problem statement or do a stakeholder map, but it's a straightforward process that you can follow along. And I think one of the most transformative experiences that fellows have is really interrogating their own kind of leadership and their personal growth and development that is required to be effective as a social change leader. And so I think that we have seen a tremendous amount of personal growth when students are not only looking to kind of have technical or skill building experiences about how to build the best organization. So I think that that's the hardest type of work, though, because it's really adaptive and on a very deeply personal level to look at yourself and examine parts of yourself that you need to tap into to be effective, need to strengthen to be effective, and need to kind of be open and vulnerable about. So I think that that's probably the hardest but most rewarding part of the experience. And I think that many social innovators go through that, whether they're part of this fellowship or not. But I think the benefit of being part of this fellowship is that you have a community of people who you can share that experience with. Allie, I'm so curious to know, what would your response be to that?
I mean, it's the same thing you said, just in like different Allie words, but basically mental models, I think, about like who you think you are, how you think you should do this work, how progress should be. Like, that is the hardest stuff, I think, by far. Yeah. So the mental models and the way you believe you and yourself and your organization should look, and breaking those to make something new and wonderful that will benefit the world, I think is really, really can be a hard time. I mean, the goal is that you leave the fellowship and you've like broken the mental model and like rebuilt a new one that serves you better for you and your work. But sometimes you're kind of like in the middle of that rebuilding when you graduate, and then we'll see you a lot in office hours when you graduate to work through that time. But it's all just kind of part of the journey. And it is definitely the most rewarding part, and having a community for that is very important, I think. Okay, there's another question, which is another really good one that we get frequently, about the level of progress that's required for an early stage venture to demonstrate a track record of action. So how would we know if it's someone just applying at an idea that they would be a good fit as a fellow? Do you want to go ahead, Colleen, and then I can chime in? Anything else?
Sure. Track record of action does not actually, in our view and how we do our training for evaluators, track record of action does not have to be on the specific, this person mentioned a venture, but the specific effort that you are advancing. So track record of action can be about what action did you take relative to the problem area that you're working in. So, if you're new to the problem space, the community, and the proposed kind of effort, that might be tough. But if you are drawing on, you came to this hypothesis, this early stage idea that you're bringing forward, what are the kind of steps that you've taken to get to that point, and what informed that, all is part of the track record of action. Anything you'd add?
No, I think that's perfect. This is a good question and a hard one that I would like to answer. So there's a question about if there is ever a case where people spend the whole year in the fellowship curriculum and then defend and do not receive funding. The answer is kind of. So typically, if we see you are on track to not receive funding, you will receive a number of interventions where we do not just kind of say that to you, we directly tell you, you are not currently on track to receive funding right now. And as I mentioned kind of earlier in this session, the fellowship itself is not adequate to drive effective action on advancing a social innovation effort. 2 to 3 hours a week is not enough time to spend to successfully advance an effort. You'll need to build a team, you'll need to fundraise, you'll need to think through your strategy a million more times than the 2 hours in the session. So if you are not spending the time doing that, we will notice and we'll talk to you about that. Our goal would be that we intervene far before the defense, and that you either pivot in your actions and how you're operating, or you identify that this is actually not the right fit for you, and that is perfectly okay with us. There are sometimes a case where someone defends after our interventions, letting them know that they're not on track, and also going through the curriculum, but not doing a lot outside of the fellowship. And this has been in many years past. We've gotten much better at selection and much better at clarity in our expectations to prevent this from happening in any time in the past years. But in the past, many years ago, it has happened before, and students receive partial funding for participating through their time in the fellowship, for contributing as an active participant, and for being a good community member, but it is not full funding to advance their effort if we do not believe that they will actually advance their effort when they do that, based off of their demonstrated track record of not doing so during the year. So the answer is, in some scenarios, some very rare scenarios, but it would not be a surprise to the person applying for funding that that is the outcome.
And I think importantly, we are on the fellow side. You know, we want to be able to give this money to students and social change makers who are advancing their efforts in a way that will create impact. So as Ali said, you know, there are a lot of interventions leading up to that point. And I would also say, importantly, if this isn't clear to anyone else, up to $30,000 each person who is part of the program, or if you're a pair, you're as a unit eligible for the up to $30,000. There's not competition within the fellowship. It's not a Shark Tank situation where we're pitting each other, pitting each fellow against each other for that funding. So everyone or pairs are eligible for the up to $30,000.
Okay. I'm going to bundle a question on budgets and funding together right now. If I go through them and then taking you any remaining questions. So postgraduate funding, when you receive it, if you receive it, there is a follow-up 1 year later, like write-up that we do. It's only 2 pages. It's pretty light. We trust the fellows that we select in the program to use the funding to do what they say they're going to do. And we're really just curious about how that turns out. And obviously for good fiscal oversight, we do check in with you, but it is mostly for our own learning and our own development as an initiative. There are some restrictions about how funding can be used. We work with fellows on a case-by-case basis about that, and it is really guidance given by Harvard. So fellows receive an in-detailed message about how funding can or cannot be used. So like no illegal activities, there's certain types of travel but were previously prohibited and now obviously are opening up as restrictions are lifting, etc. Finally, is building staff required? It might be hard given that funding is not available and in some contexts may be considered a small amount. The funding is meant to be a post-graduation runway. Sometimes staff is not required. Sometimes building staff is required. You need to look at what is needed for your particular effort. And I expect for people who are hoping to launch and lead this effort full-time when they graduate, that they will be actively fundraising throughout this year. There is no fellow in the cohort that graduated this year that only received our funding as the funding that they have. They all fundraise throughout the year, so they were able to advance this work upon graduation. But we do not expect you to have staff if that is not what is actually needed for your effort at that time, but it is really about critically analyzing if that's needed. If you have really ambitious plans and you don't have a team to do it, we will ask about that disconnect and it will be a conversation. Okay, that was my rapid fire round of funding questions. And I think we've almost answered every question we've received. If you have any outstanding questions, feel free to follow up with us via email. It's been chatted out. This presentation will be sent out to you over email just for signing up. You'll also get our emails and the slides from the presentation. So that will all be accessible shortly and also on the SciC website as well. So a number of different ways you can get it, but most easily it'll be literally in your inbox in just a few hours. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thanks, Colleen, for taking time out too, and for sharing about the program and kind of SAIC's overall approach. And to Alondra and Moo, who are here in the background, making sure the tech all runs smoothly and answering your hundreds of questions that came through. And then thank you again to all of you for being here, for your interest in our program and your interest in joining this community. I hope that a number of you apply, and that for those who don't, or who are not accepted, that you continue to be a part of this community and you're involved in our on-campus activities and come meet us at our open house this September. So take care, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you soon.